Welcome to Games from Folktales, a podcast that mixes historical research and tabletop role-playing settings. I'm your host, Timothy Ferguson. This year I'm participating in Dungeon23, which is a writing challenge where people write each day to build up a series of rooms for a mega dungeon, or, in the City23 variant, which is what I'm doing, a mass of material to be used to write a gazetteer for Ars Magica or Magonomia about the city of Venice. I had to take some time off at the end of March because of illness, so there are only 19 entries in my journal for March, and they are as follows. March the 1st, the Ducal Palace. The cool thing about writing on real places is that real maps exist. The Ducal Palace is now a museum, and their webpage has floor plans, so you know where the facilities are when you visit. They also have room descriptions and illustrations of the development of the palace over time. During the Ars Magica period, it is the Ziani Palace, but by Magonomia, it's the 15th century Foscari Palace. See palazzoducal.visitmuve.it. Their maps are presumably copyright, but as the palace is real, an illustrator making floor plans for me is fine because it's real data, not artistic IP. One more advantage of real spaces. I note here that I could go room by room in the description. I won't now, but I might in the final book. There is a virtual tour on Google Art and Culture that allows you to walk through it. And also there are further maps on Wiki Architectura. March the 2nd, Notes from Chromatopia by David Coles. Colours and dyes are interesting in RPGs because they are treasures and spell components. I'm going to use Chromatopia as my basic book for this because it sorts by historical period and is generously photographed. I may then supplement with Colour by Victoria Finlay and with The Secret Lives of Colour by Casa St. Clair. Each of these also has a textile history for weaving magic. There are still painters making their own materials in Mythic Venice, but they can now also buy paint, varnish, and other supplies at Speziali stores, which are apothecaries. Cole's introduction. Encaustic is painting with molten wax. Distemper is painting with a mix of warm rabbit skin glue, chalk, and pigment, yet another use for monster hides. Cole's problems in affording a mill, page 6, are background for an Ars companion or a Magonomia alchemist. Coles can recognise the paints he made in finished works. In-game, this would let you determine if there's been a theft or a forgery in some cases. Also, an alchemist may know his secret formula has been stolen but can't prove it because it's not obvious to others that it is a version of his paint, which is in the painting. Notes from David Coles as a glossary. Alum is used to turn dyes, liquid, into pigment, which is insoluble. Note Venice has an alum monopoly because they use alum in glass making. Pigment made this way is referred to as a lake, L-A-K-E. Paint is pigment plus a binder. Distemper is an animal binder. Egg tempera is albumin from eggs. Gesso is a mixture of chalk and glue made of rabbit skins and bones. Glare is clear egg white binder used for manuscripts and paints. Gum arabic is acacia sap used for watercolour and gouache binder. This is all for the shape and material table in Ars Magica, by the way. Natron is a historically significant alkali. Pink is the historical name for a lake pigment. It's not a colour. Potash is the historical source for alum from burned plants. The Craftsman's Handbook by Cennini is a 15th century manual of medieval painting techniques, which I will add to the lengthy list of books to follow up with. Basics. When you mix two colours to make a secondary, the new colour is less bright than the originals. With weak medieval paints, you can't just get a good red, blue and yellow and then mix out your colours the way you can with modern paints. March the 3rd. Blue. The further you are from a thing, the paler and bluer it looks. Blue is not a primary colour to the ancients. It becomes popular in Europe in the 13th century when ultramarine, which comes from across the sea, hence the name, costs more than gold. It's a symbol of the Virgin Mary and is made of ground lapis lazuli. 96% of the mineral is lost in the purification process. It's bright in egg tempera, dark in oil, and in oil you need to add white, and this is the first crack in the painter's axiom of the time of not mixing colours. Most modern blues are 18th century inventions. Egyptian blue is a lost alchemical technique that creates a glaze which was an alternative to lapis lazuli. In Latin, it's called cerulean blue, but it's also used as a generic name for sky blue from smalt or azurite. In Roman culture, blue was a low-status colour for barbarians. It only gets a boost during the 12th century when it's considered holy. Venetian worker clothes are a pale blue because of a vegetable dye. I have down here that that may be a British invention, but I can't see where I got that from. An artificial azurite called blue verditier was really popular in the Middle Ages, according to Coles, but I can't find a pre-16th century source. There's some argument that it's all azurite until the 17th century. Indigo is known in Europe, but it's rare. It's a luxury product from India, which is where it gets its name. You can make an identical chemical either by fermenting balls of woad in urine or by letting air get into the Murex purple process. But do you want to make blue when you could be making royal purple? Woad's annoying because it destroys the soil where it grows. While the dye is being made, a scum rises out of it that can be used as paint. I'm not sure if it's colour fast. Woad dye is clear to yellowish, I believe. The clothing becomes blue as the dye oxidizes. The biggest deposit of azurite is in Hungary. Azurite is mined alongside malachite. It's sometimes sold as the more expensive lapis lazuli. It's hard, it needs to be washed and sieved many times, and needs many layers to build up hue because it's so translucent. Still, it's the best that the artists can afford, and in Venice, the grueling prep work can be done by your apothecary. Chrysocolla is a solder for gold. It's found with azurite and malachite and is used as a pale blue in watercolour and egg tempera painting. It's also very translucent and is sometimes called cedar green. Smalt is a blue pigment made of grinding cobalt glass, and that appears around the 1540s. Cobalt in Ars Magica. We've done the cobalt-kobold thing before. I expect the paint is made from bloom of cobalt, blue crystals found with the metal, which may be a vis source. French ultramarine was introduced in 1828, and it could be a treasure as a process. And the traditional method of true ultramarine manufacture is detailed in Coles in page 182, which is basically an enormous amount of washing and grinding. Purple. In Ars Magica, we've already written a lot about Tyrian purple made from murex shells and lichen from the Canary Islands. Purple dye is ridiculously expensive. In Venice, you'd be an idiot to wear purple because what you wear tells people how you expect them to treat you, and if you wear purple, you're asking to be treated like a king. I believe one doge was violently deposed for dressing like a king. The modern tendency to paint shadows as violet isn't known in period. The technique for making true imperial purple was lost in 1204 and rediscovered in 1988. It was lost in 1204 when the Venetians sacked Constantinople, so secrets can be treasures. There's a chance that someone found something that the characters can use as a sort of reconstructive archaeology. There's another dye called orchil, which reaches Europe from the Levant in 14th century, first found in Florence. Red. The earliest red dyes are ochres, one of which, Veneto red, is exported from Venice for use as the colour of blood in painting, and that's useful for sympathetic magic. In ancient Greece, people manufacture red lead, which is more famous in alchemical circles as a beginning ingredient for all kinds of potions. In the 8th century, people manufacture vermilion. It's a very bright red made from sulphurous mercury, which are the two parent substances in alchemy. This is cinnabar, mercury sulfide, and the name vermilion means it looks like kermes. Cinnabar is the older name. The King of Spain sends prisoners to mine mercury at Almaden, which is a natural source of cinnabar. Kermes dye comes from shield bugs. In the Eastern Roman Empire, decrees were written in this vermilion red. In Venice, it is permitted, but an opulent colour. Red is so popular for merchants that the highest quality of fabric, scarlet, now makes people think of a particular colour of red. Cinnabar is very toxic. Coles covers dragon blood on page 48, but it's mostly what's in the ancient magic book, so I won't cover it now. Alchemists take note. You can change yellow ochre to red or brown by baking it. This is where the burnt colours come from, like burnt sienna. Red lead is what magi in Ars Magica use to rubricate texts. Well, vermilion is. The little drawings are named after lead, minim, and your gaming miniatures are named after the colour. Minim originally came from Spain. Red lead is cheaper than vermilion, so it's the most common red in medieval painting. Lac is made from an insect that infests fig trees. It's first imported into Europe in 1220, which is the starting year for Ars Magica. Nice. It gives its name to lake pigments and becomes the primary red dye. Alchemists mucking about with the pH level of lac can get it to go from red to orange to violet, and it's also one of the few paints that is edible. Its downside is that it's not light fast. Medieval people called kermes bacca, or berries, because under the medieval paradigm they might be berries rather than insects. A related product was called grain, and ingrained comes from the colour fastness of kermes dye. It's also the source of the names of crimson and carmine. It's slightly purple. Cochineal comes from the Americas, and eventually it outcompetes kermes. Brazil wood is a dye from Sri Lanka, and it's very popular, although not light fast. It's what the country of Brazil is named after. It has a fiery colour, and its name means brazier wood. Madder is imported to Europe by returning crusaders in the 13th century. The process of turning the dye into a pigment is extremely complex. The lake process is a post-game development. Dependent on the mordant, that's the fixative, used, madder can turn brown or purple. Cochineal exports from South America begin after the Spanish invasion in 1529. The Spaniards spread the story that the cochineal is a pea-like plant. It's not. Crocus martinus are iron oxide colours made alchemically from the 15th century onwards, and it needs aqua regia, which is a mixture of hydrochloric and nitric acid, or iron sulfate, which is martial vitriol, to make. It comes in red, yellow, orange and brown colours. It's not made industrial until the 18th century, and it replaces some ochres. Cardinals swap from purple to red in their robes in 1464. Orange. Orange is one of those weird colours that show up late historically in Ars Magica. People won't know what you mean when you say orange, and if you show them something that is orange, in English at least, they'll say it's golden red. The name orange enters English when the Portuguese traders lob up to flog their fruit during Elizabeth I's reign. The colour becomes associated with the ruling house of the Netherlands. That being said, there were orange paints, ochres, red leads. Even vermilion is on the yellowish side of red. The main orange paint from Rome onwards is realgar, which is an arsenic-laced mineral. Have you noticed that pretty much everything I've described so far is very poisonous? Realgar and orpiment are mined together. It's a red crystal that grinds into an orange powder. It's also handy as a rat poison. It wrecks copper and lead paints. Titian was a huge fan, though, and we're talking Venice, so you'll see some. The Dutch flag used to have an orange stripe, but they gave it up in the 17th century because they couldn't find a colour-fast dye. Yellow. Ochre, red lead, as per the previous. Gold can be used instead. There are some yellow plant dyes. Venetians really push yellow along by inventing powdered gold painting techniques and running slave plantations to harvest saffron. Saffron needs hand pollination, and each flower gives 3 tiny stamens. We have covered this in Ars Magica before because making spices is how some magi make money, and Venice's spice markets are where these shenanigans can be hidden most easily. I'd note that saffron isn't light stable, and that Zoroastrian priests used to use it to write demon-banishing prayers. Venetians also import Indian yellow, which is manganese salts. The technique for making it is lost. Modern studies hint it may have been from the urine of cows fed exclusively on mango leaves. Again, secrets can be treasures. Europeans don't import gamboge, which is the Buddhist robe colour, until the 17th century. It's plant-based and it isn't poisonous, which is odd for a paint in the period. Cole mentions there are no dark yellows. You can add black to red or blue, but if you add it to yellow, you get green. And if you invent it, you get a new treasure, much in the same way as the person who invented mauve became terribly rich. I'd note this is a problem even today. I'm a bit of a fountain pen fan, and many people quest for their perfect yellow. The problem is that if you have a yellow that's too bright, when you put it on a page, you can't see it. And so the temptation by people who make paints, well, water-soluble inks like fountain pen ink, is to give it a bit more depth of colour by putting a little bit of red in, which makes it an orange. There is a yellow paint called orpiment, which is auri pigmentum in Latin. As destiny would have it, that Latin name was shortened to arnecum, from which we get the modern word arsenic. Caligula said he could get gold out of it, but that's not how it's done in most Renaissance alchemical texts. Orpiment hates other paints. It turns lead and copper-based paints black. The basic yellow of medieval painting is called gialloledini. Modern scholars call it lead tin yellow. It doesn't mix with sulphur and literally vanished from human memory in the 18th century to recently when it was rediscovered. Naples yellow, folkloristically, comes from Mount Vesuvius, likely from 1600 onwards. It's a lead antimony blend, and it uses the same naming period as tin lead yellow, so it's hard to tell. Arzica, which is made from weld, a dye or glaze, fades in sunlight and is used for orpiment. Its name likely is a derivative of arsenic just because the colour is similar. Still de Gran, which is yellow madder berries, can produce yellow, orange or green dye. It's not light fast, but it's used to illuminate books. It's sold as a syrup in bladders, not as a powder. Green. A safe, light fast green is a sort of alchemical holy grail in real life. It's a 19th century thing, which is why landscapes before look so varnishy brown, and then they go absolutely nuts for pastoral scenes. There are green ochres, but they're rare, and there's lots of green plant dyes, but they aren't colour fast. You can grind up emerald, which is expensive, or malachite, which is hard to source and tends to blue, or you can mix blue and yellow, but then it can't be bright, and blue is made up of ground up gemstones at this point, and yellow is a poisonous nightmare. The alchemical workaround is by making verdigris, which is done by boiling vinegar under copper sheets. Long-time listeners may recall this is one of the ingredients in artificial saltpeter used to make gunpowder, and so do you want to sell it to artists so they can paint things, or to kings so that they can shoot people? Who will pay you more? Also, verdigris isn't a great green. It's got a lot of blue in it, but it's there. Seriously, make a decent green and the world will beat a path to your door. I'm missing one ochre there. I'm trying to include Verona green. It's a pale green. It's weak. It's used to underpaint skin tones in medieval art. For Venetians, it's mined nearby in Verona and in Cyprus. Modern artists call it terra verde, or green earth. It's not toxic and it binds well in oil, but it has those colour limitations. So malachite is found alongside azurite, which is why it tends to blue. It's crushed and washed and panned to get a green powder. But oddly, for a paint material, you don't grind it fine, because once it's too fine, it's translucent, and so it can't hold a bright colour. People try. Many people try, and many people fail. Some Renaissance paintings have brown foliage in them, because there was a brief fashion for verdigris resin paint, which was unstable, but only in the medium term, so the painters at the time didn't know that centuries on we would be looking at brown foliage. White. Lead white is very popular as a cosmetic, but incredibly toxic. The basics of making it are well understood. You take clay pots, which are purpose-built with an internal division. You put coils of lead foil in one side and vinegar in the other side, and then you stack them high and cover them with manure. And then you seal the room, and in Coles it says you wait for 90 days, and in St. Clair it says you wait for 30. I'd note that Coles has photos of the result of him doing this. One also says it's a 15th century invention, and the other one says it's in Pliny. The point of the manure is that it releases carbon dioxide and there is heat from the decay, so it's cooking the lead. As again I said before, it is ridiculously toxic, so it's replaced by zinc white in 1782, and then in modern painting by titanium white in 1916. Most silver in Europe comes from Spanish colonies in South America and is mined by slaves. Chalk is used to make gesso, which is the plaster which is used to prepare wood for painting. This is phased out once canvas becomes the substrate of choice. Chalk is brittle, and that means that you can't roll the paintings. It's also used as a paint extender. Talc is of great interest to Caterina Sforza, who uses it, talc water, as a base for many of her preparations. Bone white is a great way of using up monster bits. Hartshorn white is made from shed deer antlers. It is gritty and it's used to size paper for silver point. Silver point is when you draw using a thin silver pencil, much in the same way that you would use a modern lead pencil. You can't erase as easily, and you don't get the same sort of pressure gratings that you can with modern pencils, but I'm off into the weeds. Anyway, librarian notes, sizing is the spray that's put on the surface of the paper to make it ready for ink. Modern paper uses starch, which is why when you get modern books even a little bit wet, they become mold farms. Bone white is toothier. Hello, anyone else who's into stationery. That means it resists the pen more than modern spray starch. Black. Lamp black is ancient and just turns up as a freebie in most alchemical practices. Lamp black is basically what happens when hot smoke hits a cold surface. Technically, it's bluish black, and the Romans burned wine dregs to make it bluer. Modern lamp black is purer than Renaissance lamp black. Bone black is made by roasting bones with a little oxygen to make a charcoal which is washed and ground. Monster bones, like ivory black. Ivory black is a way of using up the offcuts of the ivory carving trade. It sounds kind of necromantic, eh? Vine black. You know those charcoal sticks that people sketch with? They're made, in game period, from grapevines. Modern ones are made from willow. Grapes are sacred to Venice's first saint, Giustiana, and she has this whole Diana cult thing going on. Similarly, char blocks can be made from the stones of fruit, notably peaches. Graphite is often mistaken for lead. Actual lead or silver point is used. In 1565, a huge deposit is found in Borrowdale in England, and the first pencils are made using string jackets. It's also used for cannonball moulds, so the Crown watches the mine intensely. Ghoul ink has been written about extensively in Ars Magica. I finally bought myself some ghoul ink, although it isn't made from oak galls, it's made from tea. Still, it does the same thing. I can't put it in my fountain pens because it'll rot them out from the inside. Purplish in Ars Magica period. Mine isn't. Mine's a sunset yellow and goes to a strange muddy grey green over time. But moving on. Logwood is an early true black that comes from the Americas in the 17th century. True black dyes appear from about 1360 onwards, and before that people just used very dark browns, which fade. Brown becomes more fashionable after black is colour fast. Kohl's the eye treatment that you see in Egyptian art. Its active ingredient is galena. They added colour and scent to it, and it's mildly poisonous, which is why it's used around the eyes. It prevents eye infections. Printing presses use lamp blacks, which are suspended in linseed oil, and Venice is the European centre of printing. Brown, I've discussed ochres at some length already, so I'll just skip those. Bistre is beechwood resin from the 14th century. It's a charcoal and it's used on a water base. It's called caligo in Latin. Asphaltum is a richer brown, but it's tarry and it won't mix with water, and it's made out of asphalt. Sepia is cuttlefish ink, and it's used as writing ink from the Romans onwards, and it's used as a drawing ink in the Renaissance. It's made from carefully dried ink sacs, and so it is transportable. It is also an example of how you can make treasures out of monster innards. The process is given in detail in Coles on page 89. Walnut comes from nuts, it's warm brown, it's colour fast, it's light fast, and the full process is in Coles on page 91. Mummy or mummet is literally made from mummies. It was originally used medicinally. It was originally the bitumen they were wrapped in rather than the bodies themselves. Eventually the demand was so high that you got bits of people. It's used in painting from the 16th century. Obvious plot hooks like haunting, possession, necromancy. Multiple possessions by shared people eating bits from the same mummy. Also, by preference, some people use mummified animals, so it's a little less disgusting. On from colour. The shape of the empire. The empire is broken into three chunks. The bit run by the Doge directly, which is called the Degado, which has been covered in detail. The Stato de Mar and the Domini di Terra Firma, which means the state of the sea and the dominions of the land. What's in the two non-Degado bits changes a lot. In 1220, the Ars Magica period, The Stato di Mar contains Istria, the Podesta of Constantinople, Euboea, the Cyclades, and Crete, although Crete is a special and weird case. By 1600 we can add Corfu, Argos, Nauplia, Giurizano and Alessio, Scutari, Dravasto, Levanto, Patras, Navarro. They lose Istria, and then they gain Kres, Reb, and Pag, Zadar, Vrana, and Novigrad, which are towns along the Tyrrhenian Sea coast, Cyprus, and some other places. The Domini di Terraferma spreads through northern Italy. The Ducal Corno, March 13. The corno is not a crown, it's deliberately a hat. Sure, it's a silk hat, with a gold circle around the brim, but if you get too fancy with it, other nobles will overthrow you. Every Easter, the Doge leads a procession to the deeply suspicious nunnery of San Zaccaria, and they give him a new hat. Lots of writers suggest that it's related to the Phrygian cap. This is the signature cap of House Mercure and their ancestors, the Milvi, the hawk shapeshifters, the Egyptian priests, mentioned in their house book. A note on Wikipedia links its shape to the Hedyet, which is the white crown of Upper Egypt. Could the corno be sacred to Nekhbet? She's the vulture-headed funereal goddess, and if so, is there a Shen in the annual corno, a sacred knot shape? There's a link here for the rotting princess, Nekhet being the Greek Aletheia, and she may be related to the Eleusinian mysteries. Does the protective Shen, which I mentioned a year ago, have a year duration? Is the Shen weaver magic? Is there a knotwork Verditus around? A Shen, by the way, is a protective circle of rope. The descendant of it is something you'll see as a cartouche. So cartouches are a name surrounded by a protective magical rope. They're called cartouches because when the French saw them, the shape reminded them of the cartridges from their weapons. That's not a term that's used in period. The Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock by T.S. Eliot. This gave me some thoughts on split character sheets, actually. I'm not going to read the whole thing to you, but it seems to have a monster in it, and it seems to have some other things that I particularly want to somehow include in Venice because they seem suitable. Let us go, then, you and I, when the evening is spread against the sky like a patient etherized upon a table. Let us go through crimson half-deserted streets, the muttering retreats of restless nights, in one-night cheap hotels and sawdust restaurants with oyster shells, streets that follow like a tedious argument of insidious intent, to lead you to an overwhelming question. Oh, do not ask, what is it? Let us go along and make our visit. In the room the women come and go, talking of Michelangelo. The yellow fog that rubs its back upon the window panes, the yellow smog that rubs its muzzle on the window panes, licked its tongue into the corners of the evening, lingered upon the pools that stand in drains, let fall upon its back the soot that falls from chimneys, slipped by the terrace, made a sudden leap, and seeing that it was a soft October night, curled once around the house, and fell asleep. I have heard the mermaids singing each to each. I do not think they will sing for me. I have seen them riding, seaweed on the waves, when the wind blows the water white and black. We have lingered in the chambers of the sea, by sea-girls wreathed in seaweed rich and brown, till human voices wake us, and we drown. March 15th, Dandelo's Wager, inspired by the History of Byzantium podcast, episode 259. We are so used to thinking of the sack of Constantinople in 1204 as fixed history that we don't ever seem to consider that to the Venetians at the time, this was the final throw of the dice. Enrico Dandolo had re-geared Venice's entire economy around the Crusade, then found that his customers had no money. Annual trading voyages had been foregone. There was no way of getting in external money. The government had paid out a fortune in materials and labour. Could Venice go broke? What would that have done to the West? Contrarily, what happens if the Order or some magi or some demons front up with a loan for the Crusaders and say, here's 85,000 marks? It's a lot, but the plunder of Egypt might be worth it. Sole trade privileges to Egypt, well, Alexandria, are hugely significant to the Venetians. Remember that the crusade that took out Constantinople was originally going to attack Alexandria. This was so that they had the wherewithal to sustain an army in an outrunner. So 15,000 soldiers are shipped to the Lido so they can't attack the Venetians. Innocent III is much annoyed. The papal legate is left behind. Zara, which is one of the points of resistance on the shore of the Tyrrhenian Sea, offers to surrender to Dandalo, but when he leaves to consult with the other leaders of the crusade, Simon de Montfort tells the Zarin ambassadors that their city is under papal protection, so when Dandolo returns, they have left. As the new emperor flails about, Dandolo needs to keep him in power, because if he's deposed, Venice loses the cost of the fleet, Egyptian access, Byzantine access. He needs to double down, and he needs to do it every time something goes wrong. It ends with the sack, and it claims some territory, but was it really great strategy to impoverish Venice's largest trading partner? You can pour out Eastern treasure on the Lido, sure, and everyone thinks that's fantastic, but the daily life of the people making the exports and shipping them takes a terrible battering in 1204. March 16th. The Most Holy League and the Treaty of Lodi. The Treaty of Lodi sits between the Ars Magica and the Magonia period. It ushers in 4 decades of guarded peace in northern Italy based on constantly changing factions that seek a balance of power. Venice, being rich, is one of the heavyweights in this balance. A direct effect of the treaties following Lodi is that embassies change from trips with a particular purpose to physical places with permanent staff. Venice gives its ambassadors a private budget for intelligence gathering as a matter of course. This is shocking to some of the other states, for whom spying is either irregular or done by a unit reporting directly to the monarch. So, the Doge runs the Council of 10, the Doge may have agents, the Council of 10 do have agents, and they are appointed by a council which has a secret police, and they appoint ambassadors who also have agents, so there are agents everywhere. The Venetian argument is that this is cheaper than an army, and also it's less likely to seize power than an army. March 17th, the Grand Schools. A school isn't an educational institution, it's a co-fraternity. There are great and little schools. The 6 great schools are supported by and function for the state. The little ones could be centred on a trade, a nationality, or a charitable cause. The great schools are all religiously motivated. The little schools are more flexible for PC and storytelling uses. School A members are meant to be citizens, but not nobles. Also, office bearers kept their role for ages, not like the patrician roles in the government, which are deliberately cycled rapidly to prevent corruption. Prevent there being in quotation marks to indicate sarcasm. Eventually, the state regulates the schools and delegates its social functions to them, so medicine, drugs, hospices, pauper burials, pilgrim support, all of that stops being a government function, or it remains a government function, but it's run by the great schools. It also regulates their legal articles, which are called capitulas. The standard structure, after the state takes an interest, for the great schools is that the financial members of a school elect as a board a leader, his deputy, a treasurer, a scribe, and 2 staff members per sestiere, and also another group to check the board's finances on a regular basis. Most small schools were linked to a church. Great schools each had a meeting hall. The first floor is a large hall for business and charity, and upstairs is a salon for meetings of the members, and a smaller room for the boardroom. These are sometimes lavishly decorated. Sounds a bit covenanty. Initial thoughts on masks. I've been working on mask magic on and off for decades, and there's a version of it mentioned in the Istrian section of Against the Dark. I've also stated them up as a type of parasitic prosthetic. See episode 18 of the Games from Folktales podcast. Yes, it was that long ago. I think I was overcomplicating it, though. Ours already has mechanics for possession, not just demons but fairies. Certainly Momo is terrible, but it's a model we could use. Similarly in Magonia, there's an example of a symbiotic possessing spirit. It isn't public yet, so I'm going to stop talking about it and keep moving on. Loosely, male masks are white and female masks are black. Carnival lasts roughly from Christmas to Lent. Some people wear masks out of season. A person in a mask is socially anonymous. Even if you know who they are, you are required not to say. There are rules for Noprabo already in Ars Magica, and I will probably reuse them now. Noprabo are a Japanese monster that has a face like an egg. And now on to individuals. The Zani. This is a servant type that comes in two varieties, the foolish servant and the cunning servant, and the Zani generally wears patched clothes. After the Magenomia period, this changes into the diamond shapes of Harlequin's costume. He wears a mask, but it doesn't cover his mouth so that he can talk to his master. The longer his nose, the stupider he is meant to be. This isn't an anti-Semitic thing, it is a phallic thing. Although the gait of most Zani emphasize that they carry heavy loads for a living, they also do physical comedy and acrobatics, and one of their walks is intended to indicate they are going off stage, which is a handy magical power. They also borrow props from other characters in a sort of magical way. They're driven by their appetites, and Alacino, who's a variant, will get his own episode. Some other variant of the Zani. Scapino is an escape artist, and he has green stripes on his costume. Scaramouche is a little skirmisher, dressed in black like a Spanish don. Pedrolino is in all-white clothes, which are comically oversized, and he doesn't wear masks. He wears Infarinito instead, which is a white flour makeup paste. It's the possible ancestor of modern clown whiteface. Brighelia is a cruel, vindictive, clever master of lies, an alcoholic who loves money. He wears white clothes and has an olive green mask. Mezzatino is a variant of Brighelia, less violent, more musical, and rather more creepily flirtatious. He has a brown or rust mask and a short cape. Punchinella has black or dark brown for a mask, is from Naples, has baggy clothes which are white, and carries a short stick as a weapon and a coin purse. He accidentally triumphs. He untangles the problems of others, but not his own. There is a common saying in Venice, Puncinella's secret, which is a truth widely known but not spoken of. A widely known truth treated as a secret. Periot is a late 17th century invention. He's a sad clown, and he's a rival for Columbine's affections. He wears whiteface instead of a mask, and oversized white clothes. Alacino, or Harlequin. So he's a servant, but he's a clever one. He often tricks his master and his romantic rival, Periot. He is the lover to Columbina. He can't do simple physical movements when acrobatic ones are possible. He often carries a wooden sword. He's very hungry, always, and he's afraid of his master. He's likely descended from a French demon, Harlequin. He's possibly related to the Herlasinig, the Earl King, in Walter Map's book from the 12th century. There is a version of him in Dante's Inferno. Oddly for a male character, his mask is black. This could be because of his infernal origin. His mask has warts, small eyes, a short nose, and hollow cheeks. This could be a default demon. Vecchio. The Vecchio are a class of characters. The name means elderly. They often serve as a barrier to prevent the lovers getting together. They're generally the antagonists. Pantalone is the decadent merchant, and he's the source of Shakespeare's Pantaloon. There is a Saint Pantalone. I'm not sure that they're related. Anyway, he's the butt of jokes. He's usually the father of one of the lovers. He has enough money to meddle in the lives of others. He's petty. He's single. He does, however, flirt, but he never marries. He's violently over-emotional. His costume is red, with a cap, a codpiece, or coin purse. He has a sword, a medal, or a walking stick. Balanzone, or Il Dottore, is a decadent, erudite doctor, often linked to Bologna, rich, vain, wordy. He's a parody of the educated class. He's either boring or clearly out of his depth. He wears a 1/3 mask and the robes of a scholar, and he has rouged cheeks, which is meant to demonstrate that he's an alcoholic, although that's optional. Il Capitano is a coward, a braggart. He tells tall tales about his exploits. He's greedy, he changes sides. He wears a parody of military uniform. He carries an oversized sword. His mask has a phallic nose. The original of these is Magnifico, which dates back to Roman theatre. There is a competent, useful variant of the Capitano. He's called a Scaramuccia, or Scaramouche in French. Non-comic masks. Matterson, or Frombolatore. This is a warning costume. The person is warning you that they are armed with scented eggs. Batua wears a classic white mask. The mask bows out at the base for speech and eating, so there is no mouth. It's held on by a tricorno hat, no strap. And the more I read, the more I see women wearing this, and a tricorn and a tabard. A volto has a white ghostly mask, male or female. A moretta is a small black female mask with no mouth that is held in place by a button between the teeth. It's sometimes called a virtue mask because the woman can't talk. It's considered very mysterious and erotic. Decultura is a person who is bundled in a blanket. They are a spirit of fornication. A spirito folletto is a screaming devil mask. It's a female mask. A ganaga is a man dressed as a parody of a nanny. A vitoli is a peasant or rustic mask. A poveretto is a beggar costume. A vecchia is an old woman. A bullo is a braggart in armour. A bernardon is a fake beggar with fake shoes, pushed about in a barrow. He's bandaged, he pretends to be syphilitic, he sings bawdy songs. And a salvadigo is a savage man, and a burriton is someone dressed as a puppet. Notes on the law enforcement for the poor. The rich get away with more. In 1338, you're no longer allowed to travel through the streets after dark wearing a mask. In 1606, you're not allowed to wear masks in church. In 1703, you're not allowed to wear masks while in gambling houses. In 1718, you're told to stop wearing them during Lent. And in 1448, beggars may not wear masks. The machieri, the mask makers, are, legally speaking, painters. Masks are made of plaster of Paris, fortified with wax or leather. The leather ones are heavier and less comfortable for long-term use. In 1585, if you have a mask, you're not allowed to carry a gun in the street anymore. You have to start carrying blades. Ovi odoriferi, scented eggs. These are blown eggs filled with rose water, and they are thrown at women flirtatiously, particularly during carnival, when street vendors sell them. In 1241, they are banned from the piazza. People are making noxious ovi, and some of them have ink inside, and so they decide that they're not going to allow it anymore. So this is a classic splash potion. Basically, it's a potion grenade, a water balloon. I know there's a modern version in Central and South America which have confetti inside instead. There is an odd note on ItalianCarnival.com. When you're looking up these eggs, it shows a fortune teller in Venice that's communicating with someone by whispering through a hollow cane into their ear. I've got no idea why they're doing that. I'll come up with a good reason. And I find that I have gone into the April material. So, let us stop there. Your saga may vary.